How many of you work with graphs or graph theory or network graphs? Awesome. How many of you think that funny and lol are two interchangeable terms? Nice. All right, I might not have to do that much work today. All right, so betaworks is a studio in New York City. We're in the meatpacking district. We build companies, which you might recognize some of these. We launch them. We invest in companies. We buy some as well, and some sell to other companies. We also incubate a whole bunch of companies. Like one is a super addictive game that recently came out called Dots. Poncho sends you personalized text messages about the weather, and Giphy is a animated GIF search engine, which is really awesome, and it has a great API. So back to graphs. A lot of what I do is work with social data, and I love actually using graphs to model a lot of this data because they're really great at untangling sort of connections between people and between behaviors of people. And many times, as we build out the structure of the graph, that becomes the most interesting aspect of the data, right? How do we measure different aspects of the network that we're untangling? And these are some measures that we use on a day-to-day basis. So here's a typical network graph. Here, every node represents a Twitter user. Edges represent follow relationships. And when we run community detection on the graph and then some force-directed layout, we see these clear regions appear in the graph, right? We see, and if we dig into these users, we see that it divides clearly by language, right? So these are all people who have, people on Twitter who have Python in their bios, right? And all the connections between them. We get a clear English-speaking crew of Pythonistas, clear Japanese hackers. The Chinese group is much more separated. There's significantly less bridging happening between the groups. And then we get the real deal on the left, the actual Pythons. Here's at 5'16" Exotics. It's a Python breeder, and he posts some great pictures of actual Python, so you should follow him if you get a chance. But what if instead of looking at relationships between people, we start building graphs based on interactions? So if we take, for example, Giphy, the animated GIF search engine, and we look at specific labels that people place for animated GIFs, we can start creating this crazy graph of the main concepts that are labeled with animated GIFs. And if we dive into the center of that network, we see three clear topical regions emerge, right? We have the lol, the funny lol. We have the purdy, right? And then we have movies, lots of movies in GIFs. And now if we dive into the lol part, right, so I get rid of all the rest of the nodes and just grab the lol-related cluster. And I do the same thing. I run community detection on this subgraph. And then I sort of create a layout. I see very disparate parts to this graph. There's a clear lol section and a very clear funny section, right? And it's kind of weird because those are, they seem that they would be quite interchangeable. But when you actually dive into the data, in this case, it's animated GIFs, there's the funny haha stuff, right? Oh, it's people kind of laughing. And it's all these GIFs of people and their faces laughing. Versus the lol WTF content, which is very, very, very different. So for a website like Giphy, which deals with a lot of cultural phenomenons, it's incredibly important for us to understand this difference between, let's see if this works. Can I go back? Funny haha and lol WTF. All right, now if we take this to a slightly more serious side of our work, this is DG'13, which we launched a few months ago. It helps people sift through their RSS feeds that they're subscribed to. So in this case, what you're seeing is my data folder, right? So I have all these feeds that I'm subscribed to, and I place them in my data folder. And I can read what's going on. There's a Data Gotham announcement by Hillary. So if I do the same thing and I take all the feeds across the board that people have labeled with the word data in some way, and I run the same sort of graph algorithms on it, I see, again, these clear regions emerge. And in this case, there's the crazy tech blogs, the data science stuff. Data viz is its own sort of region. And then data journalism is quite small, and the central part is sort of very big, popular content. That's not necessarily only data. So some of the stuff, when we run stats on these graphs, we can get the most prominent blogs, not only within the data community, but within the subsection of the type of data stuff that they talk about, right? And what's interesting, for example, the tech cluster, it's not only English content, right? So it bridges also a lot of Mandarin content, which is super, super interesting. So these kinds of metrics help us make much better recommendations. And the better understanding we have of how some piece of content is situated within the larger graph can help us make much more nuanced recommendations. So in closing, humans are kind of weird. They do lots of things for many reasons which we might not understand. But when we're analyzing a lot of this data from their actions, by using different graph methods, we can get a much more nuanced view of what it all means. Thank you.